She's married, but the way she looks at you isn't the way you look at a friend. Have you ever felt that? That strange silence when you two are alone. That nervousness she tries to hide. That text that takes hours to come, but arrives full of emojis, full of care, full of things she wouldn't say to just anyone. If you're here right now, it's because part of you already suspects something, and I'm going to be honest with you before anything else. I've lived this from the other side. I was once the woman who denied to herself what she was feeling for another man while still wearing her wedding ring. And that's exactly why I can show you these signs with a clarity nobody else will give you, because I'm not going to explain this to you as theory, I'm going to explain it to you as someone who lived it. Today, I'm going to show you 9 signs that psychology confirms, signs that most men ignore or misread, and along the way, I'm going to tell you real situations I lived through, or that women close to me confessed to me in conversations they would never have with anyone else. Stay with me until the end, because the second to last sign is the one almost nobody sees. And it's exactly that one that separates the man who understands from the man who gets left behind without even knowing why. Before I go on, I need you to do something with me. Write in the comments right now, even before you finish watching, have you ever felt that a committed woman was interested in you, but you weren't sure? Write it down, because I'm going to read it, and because putting it into words is already the first step toward seeing more clearly what you're living through. Come with me, because the first sign is already going to remind you of a specific moment. I'm sure of it. Pay attention to this because it seems like a small detail, but it's one of the most revealing there is. When a woman is emotionally neutral around you, her gaze passes quickly, she looks, resolves whatever she needs to resolve with that look, and moves on. No weight to it at all. But when there's attraction, even repressed, even if she won't admit it to herself, something changes in the physics of that look. It lingers. It's not just 1 extra second. Sometimes it's 2, 3 seconds, which feel like an eternity to whoever's on the other end, and which she herself feels as strange, somehow out of place. Let me give you a really practical example of how this shows up in everyday life, because theory alone doesn't help anyone recognize anything in real life. Picture a common situation, a family barbecue, a birthday party, a get-together with friends. In the middle of a group conversation, someone tells a joke, everyone laughs, and in that unguarded moment of laughter, with nobody paying deliberate attention, her eyes meet yours. In a neutral situation, that look lasts the length of a smile and moves right on to the next face in the group. But when there's interest involved, that look doesn't move on. It stays there, caught, for an instant that both of you feel, even if neither of you says anything, and then, almost like she's been caught doing something wrong, she looks away fast, down at her cup, her plate, anything that can serve as an excuse. I remember a friend of mine, married for 7 years, who told me something I never forgot. She said, "I can't explain it, but when he looks at me, I forget what I was going to say." She told me that laughing, a little embarrassed, trying to play it off like it was nothing, but the way she said it, the care she took choosing her words, showed that it wasn't nothing to her at all. That's not a coincidence. That's pure biology. It's the brain reacting before reason can get control of the situation. And the most interesting part is that she herself didn't know she was showing this, because whoever's inside the situation rarely sees their own signals clearly. There's another detail within this same sign that few men notice, and I want you to remember it. Pay attention not just to how long the look lasts, but to what happens after it. If, after holding that gaze, she smiles slightly for no clear reason, or bites her lip almost automatically, or plays with her hair, those are small physical adjustments that tend to come right after that kind of loaded eye contact. Have you ever noticed this in some married woman around you? Hold on to that answer because in a moment it's going to make a lot more sense when I show you the sign that goes hand in hand with this one. Now comes a more delicate part, and I need you to pay full attention because this one is serious. When a married woman starts telling you about the fights with her husband, about the distance between them, about the dissatisfaction she feels at home, she's not simply venting to you the way she'd vent to anyone. She's, without realizing it, testing the waters. She's telling you between the lines that she's not happy, and that maybe, just maybe, You're different from what she's used to getting. And this shows up in a very specific way in practice, let me show you. It's usually not a direct confession like, "I'm not happy in my marriage," said just like that, bluntly, all at once. No, it comes wrapped up in comments that seem harmless. She mentions that her husband never sits down to talk about her day anymore. She lets it slip, half joking, that it's been a while since anyone asked how she's really doing. She tells you she spent the whole weekend alone because he was always busy with something else. And she tells you this while looking at you in a way that expects some reaction, some comment, some sign that you noticed the emptiness she's describing. I'll admit to you that I've done this. I once used a conversation that seemed innocent about my marriage as a way to see how a man would react, to see if he'd show more interest, more care, more attention than I was getting at home. I remember an entire afternoon telling a minor fight I'd had at home to a man I barely knew, and he stayed there, listening with an attention I hadn't received in months, asking questions, genuinely caring about what I was feeling. And the worst part is that, in the moment, I didn't even know I was doing it on purpose. Only later, looking back, did I understand what was really behind those conversations. That I was, without admitting it, comparing his care to the absence I was living with at home. There's a name for this in psychology. It's called seeking external validation, and it happens when someone is dissatisfied with the emotional connection they have and starts to seek, even unconsciously, that kind of connection somewhere else. And here's the question I need you to answer honestly, even if only to yourself. Is she doing this with everyone around her? Or is it only with you that she opens up about this kind of thing? Hold on to that thought, because the next sign is going to show you a behavior that tends to show up right alongside this one, and when both appear together, the warning gets a lot stronger. Notice what time she texts you. Notice how long she takes to respond. Notice how she writes. Women who are developing interest in someone, even without consciously admitting it, change the pattern of how they communicate, and this is much easier to spot than it seems if you know where to look. Let me give you a concrete example of how this shows up. During the day, she answers your texts quickly, briefly, practically, sometimes even a little short, because the day is packed, because there's a husband, kids, work, house. But notice what happens after 10, 11 at night, when the house has finally gone quiet, when everyone's already asleep. That's when the texts change. Longer, more personal, with more questions back to you, as if she's trying to stretch that conversation out as long as she can before she has to sleep. She takes a while to answer, not because she was busy at that hour, but because she was thinking about how to write the perfect response, rewriting the sentence 2-3 times before hitting send. I've spent nights texting back and forth until late with someone I shouldn't have, making up topics, dragging out the conversation, knowing that the next day I'd feel guilty about it, but unable to just stop typing. I remember staring at the ceiling in the dark, phone still warm in my hand, smiling to myself over some silly line he'd sent, and feeling, at the same time, a huge wave of guilt building in my chest. There's a name for this too. It's called connection maintenance. It's a behavior that exists specifically to prolong the bond, even when the person denies it to themselves. There's another practical detail worth watching for: the use of ellipses and open-ended questions at the end of messages. A neutral message tends to close the topic. A message loaded with interest leaves the door open, always with a question at the end, always with a hook for you to answer again, because deep down she doesn't want that conversation to end. Have you noticed this pattern shifting with some woman in your life? Hold on to that, because now I'm going to show you a sign that only shows up when other people are around, and it's one of the most revealing there is. This sign is hard to catch, because it only happens in a group, when there are more people around, and that's exactly why most men miss it, since they only pay attention when they're alone with her. But if you pay attention, you'll notice. Her tone of voice changes when she talks to you. She laughs louder at your jokes than she laughs at anyone else's. She finds ways to stay close, even if it's subtle, without wanting to seem obvious. And most importantly, she avoids showing any of this when her husband is nearby. She reins herself in, she controls herself, she shuts down the behavior that was wide open just seconds before. Let me describe a pretty common scene so you can picture this. At a dinner table with several people, she's sitting far from you, but somehow, over the course of the evening, she keeps finding excuses to get closer. She goes to get more ice and walks past you. She helps serve dessert and serves you first, or gives you a bigger portion. She brings up something only the two of you would understand, an inside joke, a topic that only came up in an earlier conversation, and laughs, and looks at you expecting you to catch the reference, creating a little private circle inside the bigger group. A friend of mine told me, crying, that she noticed this in herself at a family party. She said she smiled more at a friend of her husband's than she smiled at her own husband, and she only realized it when her husband pointed it out, joking, but with a grain of truth to it, that she seemed like a different person around that man. She never forgot that comment, and never told anyone but me how much it hurt, because she knew it was true, knew she'd been caught in a contradiction she couldn't quite explain, even to herself. This contradictory behavior, being more open with you and shutting down when her husband shows up, is one of the most reliable signs there is, because it shows there's an awareness of the attraction, even if repressed, even if denied. Remember the first sign I told you about, the look that lasts too long? Put that behavior together with this one, and the sign gets even stronger, even harder to ignore. Before I keep going, I need to ask you for something. If this video is already making sense in your own life, hit like right now, because that helps this content reach way more men who need to understand this than you'd think. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe, because I bring content like this every week, no filter, no beating around the bush. Now comes a sign that, to me, is one of the most beautiful and, at the same time, one of the most revealing of all. If a woman remembers some small thing you mentioned just once, your dog's name, a movie you brought up in passing, some random date that seemed insignificant, that's not just a good memory. That's selective attention. It's her brain deciding, without her realizing it, to store information about you specifically, while forgetting even bigger details about other people. Here's a practical example that helps make this visible. Imagine that in some casual conversation months ago, you mentioned in passing that you don't like coffee too strong, a completely throwaway comment said in seconds, with no weight behind it at all. Weeks later, at a get-together, she offers you coffee and, before you even say anything, tells you she made it weaker because she remembered you don't like it strong. That seems small, even silly, but it's one of the most powerful signs there is, because it shows that at some point, while you were talking about coffee with zero special intention, she was storing that away, filing that detail specifically about you. I still remember to this day the name of the car a man told me he had as a teenager, a completely unimportant detail that he mentioned once, years ago, and that I never forgot. At the time, I didn't even understand why that had stuck so firmly in my head. Today, I understand it perfectly. The human brain prioritizes storing information about people who generate some kind of emotional interest. You don't hold on to details about just anyone. You hold on to details about someone who, in some way, matters to you. So when she brings up something you mentioned weeks earlier, something you didn't even remember saying, and she remembers it with detail, with precision, she's showing you, without realizing it, that you take up more space in her head than she'd like to admit, even to herself. She texts you without any real reason to. She asks things she could easily figure out on her own, no trouble at all. She makes small excuses, almost silly ones, just to keep the conversation with you going a little longer. This is what psychology calls repetitive approach behavior, when someone, even without consciously admitting it, looks for ways to stay in contact because the other person's company brings a kind of emotional comfort that's missing somewhere else in their life. Let me show you how this looks in practice. She texts you asking for a show recommendation, something she could solve with a quick search online, in seconds. Or she asks your opinion on some random decision, something that has nothing to do with you specifically, but that serves as a bridge to start a conversation. After you respond, she keeps going, asks one more thing, comments on one more thing, always feeding that thread of conversation that, deep down, she didn't need to start in the first place. I'll admit I've come up with more than one excuse to text someone I knew I shouldn't be reaching out to like that. A question I already knew the answer to. Some random topic I made up just to have a reason to write to him, like asking about a restaurant I'd already been to before, just to have an excuse to text him. And deep down, I knew exactly what I was doing, even while telling myself it was just a random question, no ulterior motive at all. And here's a question for you to think about honestly. Over the last few months, who started most of the conversations between you and this woman? Was it her reaching out to you? Or was it you reaching out to her? The answer to that question says a lot more than it seems, because who takes the initiative is one of the most reliable indicators there is. Now we get to the sign I promised at the beginning, the one most men mistake for, she's just being polite. When a married woman gets uncomfortable, laughs for no clear reason, talks faster than usual, or falls into a strange silence when you two are alone, that's not bad manners. That's not random shyness. That's her body reacting to a tension her mind is trying to control the whole time. Here's a practical example. Picture a simple situation, the two of you waiting for an elevator, or standing in line somewhere, just an ordinary moment in the day. In a relationship with zero emotional weight, that silence is comfortable. Neither of you feels any need to fill that space with words. But when there's emotional tension involved, that same silence becomes unbearable for her. She starts talking about anything, the weather, some random comment about the place, just to keep that silence from saying what it's saying all on its own, just to fill a space that would otherwise feel too charged. I remember a specific moment, in a car, alone with a man I shouldn't have been feeling what I was feeling for. The silence got so heavy that I started talking about absolutely anything just to fill that emptiness. I even ended up commenting on the traffic, on some random sign on the street, any silly topic that could break that mood. Later, on the drive home, I cried in the car, alone, because I knew exactly what that silence meant, even without having the courage to admit it out loud. The difference between ordinary nervousness and this specific kind of nervousness is subtle, but it's there and you can spot it. She avoids the moment, but comes back to it afterward. She pulls away, but somehow creates the next opportunity to be close again. She might even make up an excuse to leave a get-together early, and, that same day, text you looking for the next reason for you two to see each other again. If she's doing that with you, it's not a coincidence. It's internal conflict. And internal conflict only exists when there's real feeling involved. Small phrases, seemingly innocent, reveal a lot more than they seem to. My husband never does that. He wouldn't even notice that, but you did. Phrases like that sound casual, but they're actually one of the most revealing signs there is. When a woman starts comparing her husband's behavior to yours, even subtly, she's deep down weighing her alternatives, even without consciously admitting it. It's a natural psychological mechanism. The human brain compares what it has with what it could have. A really common example of this in practice: you do something simple, open the car door for her, ask how her day was, and actually listen to the answer. Remember some detail she mentioned the last time you talked. Small things that to you might just seem like basic courtesy. And she mentions, almost offhandedly, almost without thinking, that it's been a while since anyone did that for her, that her husband wouldn't even remember to ask how her day was, let alone remember some specific detail she'd mentioned weeks earlier. That kind of comment seems small, but it carries a huge weight. I've said things like that myself without realizing the weight they carried. Only later, thinking back on it alone, did I understand that those comparisons weren't innocent. They were an emotional thermometer I was using without knowing it, a way of measuring, without admitting it, what I was missing at home and finding somewhere else. That doesn't mean she's going to leave her marriage because of it, but it does mean for sure that she's seeing something in you that she's missing at home, and that's not a small thing. And we've reached the most emotional sign of all, maybe the most definitive one. When you two have a conversation that's more serious, deeper, more sincere than usual, and afterward she goes quiet, thoughtful, almost self-conscious. That's her mind processing something she wasn't expecting to feel in that moment. That silence after a deep conversation is recognized as an emotional overload response. The person felt more than they were prepared to feel and needs some time, even a short time, to sort all of that out internally. Let me show you how this moment usually plays out in practice. You two are talking about something deeper, fears, dreams that got left behind, regrets, things she wouldn't normally talk about with just anyone. And at some point in the conversation, she stops talking. Not because the topic ran out, but because something inside her locked up. She looks away, fidgets with something in her hands, maybe even changes the subject suddenly, almost abruptly, like she's trying to run from a feeling that grew too fast for her to process right there, in the moment. I lived through a silence like that once, after a conversation that lasted hours, about life, about plans, about things I'd never talked about with anyone else quite like that. When the conversation ended, I sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, and he asked if everything was okay. I couldn't really answer, because I didn't even know how to explain what I was feeling myself. I just knew that silence weighed on me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. If you've ever seen that kind of silence in a married woman after talking with you, pay attention, because that doesn't happen with just anyone. That happens when something real got touched. Now I know exactly what you must be thinking. Okay, I've identified the signs, so now what do I do with this? This is exactly where most men get stuck. They can recognize the interest, but they don't know what to do with that information. They get paralyzed between the fear of reading everything wrong and the fear of letting a real opportunity slip by. The answer isn't to rush things, isn't to blurt out everything you feel all at once, and it's also not to be so cautious that you pretend you didn't notice anything at all. The answer is in observing with intelligence, continuing to be exactly who you are, giving her space to come to you on her own time, and never, under any circumstances, forcing a situation that isn't ready to happen yet. Real attraction isn't won through insistence, it's won through presence, through confidence, and through the ability to notice the signs without smothering the person on the other side. If you've made it this far, that means you're not the same man who started watching this video. You now see what used to go unnoticed. You understand signs that most men live their whole lives without ever being able to decode. That's power. That's the ability to understand what's behind the words, behind the silences, behind the looks that last 1 second too long. Before you go, I need to hear from you. Comment below how many of these 9 signs you've recognized in some woman in your life, the exact number, because I'm going to read every comment. If this video opened your eyes to something you weren't seeing before, hit like right now, because that's what gets this content in front of more men who need to hear exactly this. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, because every week I bring a new topic about female psychology. Always no filter. Always the way nobody else has the guts to say it. And before I wrap up, tell me one last thing, with complete honesty. Which of these 9 signs hit closest to home for you right now? I'll be right here, in the comments, waiting to read your answer.